Welcome to the Thyroid Life podcast with me, Dr. Rebecca Warren. I created this podcast because I wanted to empower, educate, and equip women to not only just truly understand thyroid hormones, but understand their bodies and how to get themselves well. This is such a unique podcast because not only am I a doctor that's worked with women all over the world on reclaiming their health, but I've walked that same path as well. If you want more information about what it looks like to work with me, get my free Optimal Lab ebook, get plugged into my amazing Thyroid Inner Circle community, as well as join my newsletter, go to my website, drrebeccawarren.com. All right, guys, so let's talk about just the relationship that these thyroid hormones, like if your thyroid hormones are dysregulated, let's talk about that relationship to our hormones. And, I've touched on menopause and sex hormones again, but, one common thing that shows up for me often when I work with women is there is these kind of comorbidities between HPA dysregulation, thyroid hormone issues, and a history of sex hormone issues, right? And so what I try to determine, I do know a lot about the thyroid gland, healing after thyroidectomy and all of that, but I've had through the years to dive deep into the research and really put into practice what it looks like to balance sex hormones and HPA dysregulation because it pretty much goes hand in hand. But when I sit down with a woman and we go, like when I do these kind of first initial consults, right, this discovery call, the whole purpose of that call is to go back years, decades in the past, because there's usually breadcrumbs. Well, a lot of the women, it's not just breadcrumbs. There's like sirens that were happening in the past that you just didn't know, like they didn't know like what it would lead to, or that there's something that could be done about it. And so my discovery calls when I'm doing this, or someone in my like my membership community, if they do a one-on-one consult with me, I am trying to determine, is the thyroid the original issue, or is it the thyroid is eventually affected because there's all these hormone issues? And that's really important. I'm really passionate about this. I'm very passionate about women's health, empowering women in our medical system. Our medical system is atrocious to women. We have studies, we have data, we have stats on this with here in America with, from the birthing process to mortality rates for new mom, like for not new moms, for mothers that, birth or mortality rates are just awful for being such a developed, essentially rich country. Like we know in studies and data that there's gender bias in medicine. And it makes me sick to think that there's so many women that live their life without understanding how powerful it is knowing your menstrual cycles and your sex hormones. I'm just so freaking tired of it only being about, if you're trying to get pregnant or not. Like that's the only point that I've seen. This is going to be a blanket statement, right? Not every single medical practitioner is this way, but across the board, what I most commonly see is that there isn't a discussion about sex hormones, really like the impact of sex hormones, unless there's a fertility issue. And at that point, there's been an issue there for a really long time for fertility to be affected. And even in the fertility, it makes me sick. I've had multiple women come to see me because they wanted to work on their fertility health, join my community group because they want to work on their thyroid and sex hormones so that they can get pregnant. And it makes me sick because through the years, I've worked with women that have had miscarriages. And I'm trying to remember how many times a lot of you guys might be listening to this and you're like, oh, yep, my doctor told me the same thing. I think they're like, you got to have like 3 miscarriages before they do something. What? That's insane. But the thing is, like, the same things that can cause issues there and the same exact things that can cause a disastrous transition into menopause are what's affecting your overall well-being, your mental health, your ability to handle stressors and feel good and happy and emotionally balanced. Like our sex hormones are so powerful. So what I want to do is I want to kind of make that connection for you, like like how could my thyroid hormones, for those healing after thyroidectomy, how can my thyroid, affect my sex hormones? How can it affect my menstrual cycles? How can it affect perimenopause and menopause, and like how to start testing for this the right way? Okay. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I have notes because I could talk hours for this. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do bullet point notes so I can make sure I don't go too far off like a 2 hour episode. But if you want these notes, if you want this, go to my website, drrebeccawarren.com. I'll put a banner there, and you can get it. I'll make it into like an easy downloadable uh, document that you can have if you want to know about this, especially with the studies that I reference. Okay. So, what's the biggest thing to understand? So, the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So, the hypothalamus master control center, pituitary, it essentially like affects all of your hormones in your body. But with the HPA axis, that's where you're going to get influencing, that's where you'll be influencing T4, T3. And that T3 is really important on how the hypothalamus and the pituitary essentially communicate with all your hormones in your body. So in your pituitary, you have gonadotropin releasing hormone. That's going to come from the hypothalamus first. Okay, let me just say it's going to come from the hypothalamus, and it's going to talk to the pituitary. And from the pituitary, you're going to release LH, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. And so we know about these hormones, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormones, because FSH is what's primarily what you find in the follicular phase. So it's day one bleed until you ovulate, and then you're predominantly with luteinizing hormone. It's the signaling. It essentially tells those ovaries what to release. It's saying like, like it's that traffic guard, right? Like here we go. Now we're focus on estrogen dominance, testosterone, maturing the follicle, getting the egg ready. Luteinizing hormone is releasing that egg, and progesterone really focus. And so when we see low levels of T4 and T3, you are going to see an increase of TSH. Like you should see an increase of TSH. You'll see that number start to creep up. And the best way I explain this is that it's kind of like a siren that's going off that's saying, you know, we're under stress here. We need to respond accordingly, right? Like we need more hormones, whatever is the reason that's triggering this need for more hormone, that TSH rise, it's going to affect your body overall. And this is what I always try to explain and make sure that, like, the women in my community group, they understand is that your body's intelligent. It's going to protect itself, right? It's going to make sure that if things aren't right, it's going to conserve energy. It's going to have a hierarchy of needs. And if you are suboptimal, and we're talking about within range, right? Within range of T3, you're going to have a body that's going to want to focus on how do I adapt to what I'm missing. And plain and simple, in a very ancestral way, fertility, like getting pregnant, it's not good to get pregnant when your thyroid hormones are suboptimal. You're not producing enough energy and ATP at a cellular level because of that. Like you can't sustain yourself and do everything you need to do for a baby. So that's the ancestral side. So what we're going to see is if there's not a response to this increase of TSH and decrease of active thyroid hormone, and it's not addressed, then your body has no choice but to now conserve energy and focus on the most important needs, which is not LH and FSH and estrogen and progesterone. So then essentially what you're going to see is a decrease of these signaling hormones because your body's like survival mode. Okay, I bet you that sounded really weird, that pop there. I really get into it when I'm talking about this stuff, but I was like, I just popped. Anyways, going back to what I was saying. So your body, what you're gonna see because that TSH increase is as that continues to go on, you're gonna stimulate prolactin production, which can then inhibit that gonadotropin releasing hormone, which then tells the pituitary, I'm going to decrease this. And then your menstrual cycle is disrupted. So, what do we see? Infrequent menstrual periods, really heavy menstrual bleeding, absence, like just your menstrual period goes away completely. None of these are normal. And if you're having these types of things, like, oh, one of the beginning signs I do see is it starts to get lighter. Like, oh, yeah, I used to bleed for 5 days and now I'm bleeding for 3. That is not it's not good. Now, a study published in Thyroid found that there are menstrual like dysregulation in 68% of women with hypothyroidism. But you know what stinks is like, you know, you have a thyroid issue, you go see your endocrinologist, you have an OBGYN, focus on those sex hormone issues. And a lot of times I've heard a common messaging of like, oh, like OBGYNs will be like, nah, if you're not getting pregnant, don't worry about it. Or what is the one and only way? What is the one tool that OBGYNs have? The one tool for any type of hormone dysregulation issue, acne, painful periods, periods. Their one thing is a pill, the birth control pill, or some type of birth control, right? Where they shut down this communication that's happening with the HP, oh, like your ovaries, shuts that all down. And then you depend on the pill for this pill bleed and, to essentially have a quote unquote cycle. And that's just crazy to me, which listen, I understand like if you're having difficult periods and you're things like that, like it makes a lot of sense if all you have to use is birth control. Like, absolutely. I mean, I've heard some horror stories. That's understandable, but that also just ticks me off because it's like, why aren't you looking at all of it together, and not just the thyroid, but hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, cortisol? Like, I never see proper cortisol testing in women when they're having menstrual cycle issues or fertility, stuff like that. So, really important to understand. And then there's another study in the Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism, and it highlighted that 59.1% of women with hypothyroidism experienced either no cycle or irregular cycles. And at that point, I always say that if you're not asking the right questions in studies, then you're not going to get the right answers, right? Like, how long has this thyroid dysregulation been going on? Like, I bet there's more, the percentage is higher for those that are chronically misdiagnosed or mistreated or not healing their thyroid because their doctor's not giving them right information. And don't even get me started on healing after thyroidectomy, because that was one of my issues that I had post thyroidectomy, was that I wasn't on the proper amount of thyroid meds. I was on T4 only. I wasn't converting it at that point, and my menstrual cycles were gone. Like, or they started becoming irregular. So like we're talking about they're really light, and then they would come every couple months, but they kind of made it seem like it was really normal. Just so you know, it's not normal. Let's see another study here. Let's talk about hyperthyroidism. They found in one study up to 45% of women with hyperthyroidism. Another study published in Clinical Endocrinology found that women with hypothyroidism had a higher prevalence of menstrual issues compared to healthy controls. In the end, it's all going to be connected. Now, where does the autoimmune disorders come into play with this? The autoimmune disorders is Hashimoto's, Graves'. They are going to cause dysregulation in, thyroid hormone output. I want to say something that's really interesting and I think is really important to understand with thyroid, like autoimmunity, is that you can go hypo, like when you, like, let's say you have hyperthyroidism Graves', you can go from hyper to hypo. Okay. uh, let's see. So Graves is essentially an autoimmune disorder where you're making too much thyroid hormones, but you can see that sometimes it dips down and you feel like you're hypo while on Graves. especially when the adrenals are really are being affected. Graves is very, very serious and it's a lot on the body. And then for those that have hypothyroidism, autoimmunity like Hashimoto's, where you're predominantly hypo, you can have hyper symptoms, especially as the cells die off. So that's really important to understand is that because a lot of times people are like, well, no, I have this, but then I feel this way. Like when I first started practicing, oh, hypothyroidism look like this. Now, anyone can get it. Anyone can have this issue. It affects everything in your body. So essentially, I mean, you can have any symptom and it can be related to your thyroid hormones. So as I said, those thyroid hormones can affect ovarian production of estrogen and progesterone, which are going to be really, really important. And as a reminder, when it comes to estrogen, estrogen is what makes you a woman, right? It gives you the curves, the hips. It's like a very growing, strong. I like to consider estrogen as like you just feel like powerful, right? Like you like estrogen is like thickening that uterine wall. That's also that follicular phase is also where you're releasing testosterone. You can just really feel just in charge and ready to go. And it's fantastic. Estrogen is protective for the heart for women and brain and bone. It's beautiful. And then progesterone is in the luteal phase. And this one kind of, keeps that estrogen in check and it's calming and soothing and really supportive, right? Really works on your brain, those GABA receptors, good sleep, and just feeling overall healthy and mentally stable in life. And, once you see a decrease in this, like there's so many different patterns that can end up showing up when you have hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, right? You can start to see like, estrogen dominance symptoms or low progesterone symptoms. And so let me kind of like paint you a picture of a few different things I can see. When it comes to estrogen and progesterone, you can have a lot of estrogen either because of xenoestrogens, estrogens in our environment, or just your body's having difficulty with its detox pathways where you're not properly eliminating the estrogen that you're making. Either you're making too much of a 4-OH, 16-OH metabolite, you're not methylating well, or gut related dysfunction, dysregulation there, where you're not pooping well, or you don't have proper bile release, the liver's kind of sluggish. You could have, bacterial imbalance in the gut. So it's really important to understand that these different things could be going on because there is a connection between T3 and the gut. You could also just have too little progesterone, which I see a lot of. Like I've done so many Dutch tests here lately where estrogen levels are like fine, but the progesterone levels are tanked. And when I test them, they're like, you know, like almost into menopause, like levels. They're in their 30s or 40s and they shouldn't be in menopause, but they're in those menopause levels. And so when you have those imbalances, you're going to have those symptoms that are going to tell you that something is going on. There is no, what I have found is there is no clear path like, okay, if my thyroid is affecting my sex hormones, this is what I'm going to have. And everyone's going to have these same symptoms. It's going to look different for everybody. One of the big things before I go into perimenopause and menopause is I want to establish testing. Okay. I don't, I, I've experimented with multiple people and like testing thyroid hormones in different part of the cycles. It's not a big difference testing your thyroid hormones in different parts of your cycles. But I'm getting so tired of getting blood work and like these OBGYNs are just like testing whenever. You don't test whenever if you're menstruating. You need to test your estrogen and progesterone at least 5 to 7 days post ovulation. And you should know when you're ovulating. If you need to get blood work done, you can go get those LH strips and, do those ovulation strips so that you can know for sure. And then you can get an accurate number. That way you can test progesterone and estrogen. So even though progesterone is the predominant hormone in the luteal phase, you do have like a spike of estrogen, and it's usually around that 5 to 7 day mark post your ovulation. Okay, that's really important because we can all ovulate at different times. If you want to get an accurate reading, you want to do that. And some other sex hormones to get tested. It's going to be DHEAS. You can test that whenever that's a stable number. Testosterone, I usually like it tested before ovulation in the morning to see what that looks like. I usually like to look at between like day 10 to, right before ovulation for testosterone because we see an increased number of testosterone. I like total testosterone, free testosterone, sex hormone binding globulin. I like estradiol, esterone, estriol, and progesterone and DHEAS. I like to see all of those hormones and testing them at the right time. It's worth it to get that data and information. Of course, if you've heard me talk about hormones at all, for both menstruating women or postmenopausal women, I love the Dutch test. It's beautiful, it's deep, it is intricate. There's so much information. That is what women like testing hormones should be like. You want to understand your body, you want to know more about it, like you want to reconnect and really go deep. Dutch test is it's that. Like that'll be the test I do for myself that I recommend the women I work with and in my community group to do yearly or every 2 years to just really keep an eye on true hormone health. So if you want an idea of what that looks like to like get your Dutch test done, I'll put a link here in the notes. But let's go ahead and talk about what this looks like for women that are perimenopause or menopause. And just so you know, as a reminder, like being menopause is 12 months without a menstrual cycle. And that means like you go 9 months and you randomly get it and you don't get it for another 9 months, you're still not in menopause. And perimenopause can be a year to over a decade, the transition, right? I'm going to go ahead and clarify before I jump into this. Menopause is not a disease process. There's nothing wrong with menopause. In fact, I think it's a fantastic new season, conservation of energy, ability to have sex without, getting pregnant. And let me go ahead and tell you this. Like, can I just say this for women? Like, your sex life, your ability to want to have sex, to enjoy sex, your ability to orgasm is associated with your overall wellness and health. I don't know. I don't know what. I don't know. I don't know. Probably this medical system and how women have been treated historically. But there's this like I see so many women that are like, my sex drive is done. Like I just struggle or it hurts or no way, no way, no way. It shouldn't be like that. And if it is like that, then there's some underlying estrogen issues. There's some testosterone issues going on there, thyroid hormone, like that that is not that's not normal. And just because you get older does not mean that's how it should be. But I hear that so much. And I want you to understand that, like, I feel like sex within the medical system for women and like enjoying it and having sex can be kind of treated as like this secondary extra little thing that if you're blessed enough to have a sex drive, like, congrats for you. But most women just don't have it. But sex and a healthy sex life, an enjoyable sex life, it is a part of being human, a part of being woman, and a part of being well. So I would like to, whether you're menstruating or postmenopausal, like I want to make sure that you guys hear me say this, that you deserve to be well enough to have that kind of sex drive because it's associated with your overall health and wellness. Okay. So menopause, you can't get pregnant. Like that should be a great time for you. But a lot of women are suffering through. And the most common reason is because they have underlying issues. That's what I find over and over again. You had years and decades of issues that were ignored or covered up. So now when you're going into menopause, you have all these women that are going into menopause from the same medical system having the same types of issues. So you ask your friend, your coworker, someone from church, and you guys all have the same issue. So you think this is okay. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal, right? So let's talk about how like the thyroid hormones can affect like your experience going into menopause. So like I said, menopause, 12 years. Perimenopause should be like, you don't automatically go from like making sex hormones to not making it in the ovaries. It's kind of like an up and down kind of kiddie roller coaster. I always say it's a kiddie roller coaster, but you guys have had underlying issues that by the time you go to perimenopause, it's like a full blown roller coaster where you have a spike of estrogen and then you come crashing down and hot flash and all these symptoms, right? It should not be like that. There should be kind of like a riding up and down. Some days you have a little bit more estrogen, other days you have less estrogen, but that's not what it is for a lot of women, especially probably a lot of you guys that are listening to this. So, what's interesting too is that a lot of, dysregulation within your hormones look like the same types of symptoms as with your thyroid hormone. So, like weight gain and fatigue and mood swings, those types of things are common in hypothyroidism and, menopause, where those hormones are dysregulated. I do get a lot of questions about bioidentical hormones or hormone replacement. I don't prescribe medication, but I'll tell you what, never in my life would I ever be on hormone replacement. Bioidentical is a different thing. And I think there can be a time and a place for bioidentical hormone. The problem I have with bioidentical hormone, the problem I have is that when you're in menopause, your adrenals are front and center, right? Your adrenals make that DHEA, the estrogen, progesterone, like the hormones you need post menopause, those adrenals need to step up to the plate, right? But if all you're doing is putting in the end product, like even if it's bioidentical, like I feel the same way about thyroid hormones. If you have the thyroid, like I understand that if you're in a deep hole and you've been hypo for so long, or you're in a deep hole and you've had low sex hormones for a really long time, that you need to get your head above water, right? And that's where these things can come into play. Get your head above water so that you can do what? Fix the problem, support your body, balance hormones. But the thing that I get frustrated about, and I've seen this over and over again, is you can get on bioidentical hormones, you get the sex hormones, so that starts to feel better, but there's still all this dysregulation with the hypothalamus, pituitary adrenals. That's still going to affect how your body functions and regulates over time. So I think bioidentical can be a fantastic thing. I have nurse practitioners I refer to for this, but you've got to understand that like you reset those adrenals, you reset that body, that signaling, your brain, your health, your overall health, and you should be able to make those hormones in menopause. Okay? So that's my little thing there, my little soapbox about bioidentical hormones. Okay? So let's talk about what some of the studies show. A study in clinical endocrinology reported that women with hyperthyroidism, like, well, that T3 goes a little bit higher, or there could be some of you guys might be on too much thyroid meds, which is a possibility. They experienced an earlier onset of menopause and more intense menopausal symptoms compared to those without thyroid dysfunction or thyroid hormone dysregulation. Research in Journal of Women's Health found that hyperthyroidism women often reported a more challenging transition into menopause. A study in thyroid found that women that had hypothyroidism and autoimmune disease had more severe menopausal symptoms and an increased risk of early menopause. Research in the Journal of Endocrinological Investigation observed that thyroid autoimmunity is associated with a higher prevalence of menopausal symptoms and earlier onset of menopause. You go into your doctor's office and you feel like you might be going through menopause and you're in your 40s, late 30s, even late 40s. And the doctor's like, yeah, congrats. This is menopause. Welcome to all this suffering that all the women go through. When in actuality, it could be related to this HPA dysregulation, an autoimmune disorder in your body, or that thyroid hormone. It's it's connected. And like the idea isn't just to push through. The idea is to identify why this is so difficult for you and how to get better. Another thing that I think is really important, and um, this is going to be menopause related, but also fertility related, because I've seen this recently, is that thyroid hormones also affect your ovaries' ability. Okay, I talked about that. The ovaries' ability to produce estrogen and progesterone. But they can also lead like these thyroid hormones, especially suboptimal. I hope you guys understand what I mean by this. You guys are getting your thyroid labs done, not looking at T3 or not getting T3 done, or you are getting your thyroid done, thyroid hormones, you're getting T3 done, but the range goes from a 2 to a 4.5. And you had a 2.3, and your doctor's like, good job, you're in the medical range, but you had the signs and symptoms that things aren't right. But one thing we know is that low thyroid, it's going to lead to things like early ovarian failure, right? Issues with eggs being released, issues with progesterone. This is like a really big deal because in studies, when it looks at, and I'm going to kind of talk about fertility here for a second, when we see that, I mean, like that's a big issue. But when we're looking at you, when we're looking at studies like IVF studies and when it comes to thyroid hormones, there's no question about it. In those studies, they're saying TSH needs to be under a 2.5 without a doubt. Obviously, I want more information on T3 because that's the active thyroid hormone. But I mean, there's doctors that are letting you guys go walking around at a 3 or 4, 5 just because you're still within medical ranges. And just because that TSH is high doesn't mean you run and get on thyroid meds. That TSH is high. We need to rebalance your thyroid, address the autoimmune issue, address the toxicity. That's a really big deal. But a lot of women are also not just seeing the ovarian reserve issue with fertility, but they're seeing the ovarian issue with going into early menopause. And so I just, biggest thing like I want you to take away from this is like to reframe our thinking about all this things that we're being told is normal when they're not normal. Okay? Um we need to look at things from the point of view that your body was fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay? You have an incredible innate intelligence every single day. It's working for you. Every single day, you're killing off cells to create new cells, to fight off cancer, to try to fight off heart disease. We live in a more and more toxic world. And especially for women, what's expected of us is a lot. And I don't ever want you to get to a place where you're feeling like your body's just failing you and you've had all these issues and you think it's just you, when in actuality, that's wrong. There's big stressors. You didn't get the right information you needed. Like your body's incredible. It's truly incredible. And listen, I'll tell you this after my, thyroidectomy and high dose radiation, I remember 7, 8 years post thyroidectomy. Oh my gosh, it was like my body was my enemy, especially when I was couldn't lose weight and all this, stuff and I was struggling with hypothyroidism. Even though I was eating well and exercising, it felt like my body was my enemy. But it's not, and it took me quite a few years. I was just angry too about what I went through and how I didn't have hope and I didn't have someone that could walk with me and really help me understand what was going on. That couldn't ask questions. It was just kind of like, no, whatever, you're on your way, you're good now. And that can be really frustrating when you know something is wrong, but you're not really getting the answers for that. I want you to understand that if you feel something is wrong, regardless of what your doctor's trying to write off, you can get better. You got to find that dysfunction, dysregulation, what's going on there, and start addressing that. And the goal isn't that you're going to be completely different in 30 days or 6 months. The goal should be that each year you get better and better. You don't get worse. And the last thing I'm going to leave off with, like with the testing, that's why I think complete wellness testing is important. Understanding what all those numbers mean and getting it done at the right time. If you're in menopause, or if you don't know if you're in menopause, if you look at FSH and LH, and those numbers are excessively high, out of range, you know, that's telling you like what ends up happening is like when you're going into menopause, those numbers go up because signaling is like, hey, what's going on here? But when it comes to the Dutch test and those hormone tests, you can test whenever. And if you haven't done a complete wellness panel looking at all these numbers, I absolutely menstruating, not menstruating, absolutely recommend that. I want to encourage you guys. This whole purpose of today's episode is to start understanding that this messaging that we've been given about what's normal is not normal. It's common, but that doesn't make it okay. So be encouraged. There's a lot of hope and healing out there. Be connected. If this episode helped you, please leave me a 5-star review. I'd love to get this message out to more people. Make sure to be tuned into my newsletter. Follow me on socials. Not super active right now because 3 kids and all of that good stuff, but I have some really great content I'm going to put out there for you. And of course, if you want the notes from today's episode, go to drrebeccawarren.com and download it there. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to leave a 5-star review. I love being able to see and read how this information is helping you on your health journey. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way, when new episodes are live, you can have it automatically downloaded to wherever you listen to your podcast. The number one question I get asked is, how do I work with you? If you are interested in finding out more information about me and being a part of my community, go to my website, drrebeccawarren.com. That's dr.rebeccawarren.com. And you should be able to find the answer to your questions there, as well as checking out my Thyroid Inner Circle membership group, getting access to the free Thyroid Labs ebook that I have available for you, and so much more great information.